The storm rolled in without mercy. Wind howled through the trees, rain pounded against rooftops, and lightning cracked across the sky like the world itself had been split open. Daniel stood at his kitchen window, staring into the night. He wasn't one to spook easily, but the storm had teeth. Beside him, the dim glow of a lamp lit the small room, casting warm shadows over the modest space he and his daughter, Emily, called home. Emily was asleep on the couch tucked beneath a blanket, her little chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Daniel had tried to move her to her bed earlier, but she'd insisted on waiting for him to finish his late shift. Now she was out cold, thumbs still hooked around the stuffed bunny she carried everywhere. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. Life hadn't been kind these past few years, losing his wife, raising Emily alone, working long hours as a mechanic just to keep the lights on. But he managed. Somehow he always managed. A sharp knock rattled the door. Daniel froze. At this hour, in this storm. He glanced toward Emily, then moved cautiously to the door. Another knock, louder this time urgent. He opened it slowly, ready to tell off whoever had lost their mind in weather like this. Instead, he found a woman standing there, soaked to the bone. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her clothes plastered against her frame, her eyes wide with exhaustion. She looked like she'd been fighting the storm for miles. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. I just need somewhere to wait it out." Daniel hesitated only a second before stepping aside. "Come in before you drown out there." She stumbled through the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the worn rug. Daniel shut the door against the howling wind and hurried to grab a towel. She accepted it gratefully, shivering as she wrapped it around herself. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." Daniel nodded. "You're safe here." For a moment, they just stood there, the storm's fury muted by the walls around them. She looked fragile, but there was something in her eyes. A sharpness, a depth, that didn't quite match the picture of a helpless stranger. "Name's Daniel," he said finally. "Elena," she replied softly. Emily stirred at that moment, blinking awake and rubbing her eyes. When she saw the dripping stranger she sat up straighter. "Daddy, who's that?" Daniel smiled faintly. "This is Elena, she got caught in the storm." Elena knelt, her soaked hair falling over her shoulder. Despite her exhaustion she offered Emily a warm smile. "Hi there, you must be the brave one keeping your daddy company." Emily giggled, instantly charmed. "I'm Emily." Daniel exhaled, tension easing just a little. Whoever this woman was, Emily already liked her. And that meant something. He guided Elena to the kitchen, poured her a mug of coffee, and let her sit at the small table. She wrapped her hands around the cup like it was the only warmth left in the world. "You live around here?" he asked carefully. Her eyes flickered, as though she was deciding how much truth to share. "Not exactly. I was driving back from a long meeting. My car gave up on me a few miles back, and the storm did the rest." Daniel nodded. "Figures. This old road eats cars alive in bad weather. You're lucky you made it this far." Lucky, she almost laughed at the word. Elena had money, power, a name that carried weight in boardrooms across the country. But none of it mattered tonight. Tonight, she was just a woman lost in the storm, clinging to the kindness of a stranger. As the night stretched on, the storm showed no sign of mercy. Daniel insisted she stay until it passed. He fetched her some of his late wife's clothes, soft sweatpants and a hoodie, and let her change while he checked on Emily. When Elena reappeared, the sharp edges of her wealthy world seemed to fade. She looked like any other woman sitting in his kitchen, hair damp, sleeves too long for her arms, sipping coffee as thunder shook the windows. They talked in fragments at first. About the storm, about the road, about nothing that mattered. But slowly, the silence filled with pieces of themselves they hadn't shared with strangers in years. Elena admitted she had lost her parents young and had built her life alone. Daniel spoke of Emily, of the nights he worked late and the mornings he struggled to braid her hair. "You're doing better than you think," Elena said quietly when he mentioned his doubts. Her words hit deeper than she knew. Daniel had carried guilt for years, always afraid he wasn't enough for his daughter. Hearing a stranger, this stranger, say otherwise lit something warm inside him. Hours passed. Emily, now fully awake, sat with them at the table, asking Elena questions with childlike curiosity. Elena answered each one with patience and laughter, her polished exterior slipping away until she seemed almost ordinary. Almost. At one point lightning cracked so close the lights flickered. Emily yelped, and without thinking, Elena reached out and pulled the little girl against her side. Daniel watched as Emily relaxed, soothed by a woman she'd met only hours ago. And in that instant something shifted. By the time dawn painted the sky in wary gray, the storm had broken. Rain slowed to a drizzle, and silence settled over the little house. Elena rose reluctantly, thanking Daniel for his kindness, promising she'd find a way to repay him. "No need," he said. "Just glad you're safe." But Emily tugged on Elena's hand, her small voice filled with stubbornness. "Don't go yet. Stay a little longer. Elena's chest tightened. She had board meetings to run, empires to oversee, a world where vulnerability was weakness. Yet here was a child asking her to stay, and for the first time in years, she wanted to say yes. She smiled down at Emily, then looked up at Daniel, who stood quietly by the door. His steady gaze told her he wouldn't ask for more than she was willing to give. And somehow, that made her want to give everything. For the first time in a long time, Elena realized she wasn't just surviving the storm outside. She was finding shelter from the storm inside. Elena lingered longer than she meant to. What was supposed to be a brief refuge stretched into breakfast, into laughter at Emily's messy attempt to flip pancakes, into stories that neither she nor Daniel had told anyone in years. It felt disarmingly natural, as though she hadn't just stumbled into a stranger's life but had been part of it all along. But when the clock ticked past 9, reality pressed in. Elena stood by the window, her phone buzzing with messages from her assistant. She was supposed to be across town, chairing a meeting, deciding the future of hundreds of employees. She was Elena Harper, the CEO whose signature sealed billion-dollar deals. Yet standing in Daniel's kitchen, with Emily tugging on her hand and Daniel pouring coffee into a chipped mug, she felt like just Elena, and she didn't want to let go of that. "Duty calls," she said softly, forcing a smile. Daniel studied her, then nodded. He didn't pry, didn't ask what world she was returning to. But something in his eyes, quiet acceptance, mixed with something she couldn't name, stayed with her as she stepped back into the drizzle. Her driver found her car abandoned by the roadside later that day. The company board buzzed with questions about her absence, but Elena deflected them all. She couldn't explain what had happened that night, not in terms they would understand. Yet she couldn't stay away. The following week, she found herself driving back to that small house on the edge of town. She told herself it was to thank Daniel properly, to bring Emily the new storybook she'd mentioned loving. But when Daniel opened the door and smiled in quiet surprise, Elena realized the truth: she had missed them. What began as occasional visits turned into regular ones. Some days she arrived with groceries, other days with her laptop, setting up at Daniel's kitchen table while he worked at the garage. Emily grew attached quickly, dragging Elena into board games, asking her to braid her hair, proudly showing off school drawings. Daniel watched it all unfold with a mix of wonder and hesitation. He had built walls around his life after his wife's death, convinced that love only led to loss. But Elena slipped through those walls without forcing her way in. She belonged, in ways he hadn't thought possible. Still, the contrast between their worlds never faded. Daniel noticed it in the way her car gleamed against his battered truck, in the elegant way she carried herself, even when dressed in his late wife's old sweatshirt, in the calls she sometimes took in hushed tones about projects and negotiations. She never boasted, never made him feel small, but he couldn't silence the voice that whispered he wasn't enough. One evening as they sat on the porch watching Emily chase fireflies, Daniel broke the silence. "You don't owe us anything, Elena," he said quietly. She turned to him, brows knitting. "What do you mean? You've got a life. Bigger than this, bigger than me. You don't have to keep coming back just because you feel grateful." Her eyes softened, but her voice held steady. "Do you really think I come here out of gratitude? Daniel, in my world, people smile because of what I can give them. Here, Emily laughs because she wants me around. You look at me like I'm human, not a headline. That's why I come back." He didn't answer, but something in his chest shifted. For the first time in years, hope slipped past the fear. The shift deepened weeks later when Emily grew sick with a fever. Daniel panicked, memories of hospital nights with his late wife flooding back. He was about to rush Emily to the ER when Elena arrived, calm and steady. She called her private doctor, stayed by Emily's side through the night, holding cool cloths against her forehead, whispering soothing words. When Emily finally slept peacefully, Daniel stood in the doorway watching Elena. Her hair was messy, her designer blouse wrinkled, but she looked radiant in her quiet strength. He realized then that she wasn't just a visitor in their lives anymore. She was part of them. But love rarely comes without tests. Word spread of Elena's visits to a mechanic's modest home. Tabloids whispered, investors frowned, her board questioned her judgment. One shareholder even confronted her directly. "You're risking your image, Elena. You can't be seen wasting time in places like that." She listened, calm but resolute. For the first time she didn't bend. "If my image can't survive me being human," she said, "then it isn't worth protecting." That night, she returned to Daniel's house late, shoulders heavy with the weight of her world. He saw the fatigue in her eyes and offered no speeches, just an open space beside him on the couch. She sank into it, let his arm circle her, and for once allowed herself to rest. Weeks later, as autumn leaves painted the town in gold, Elena invited Daniel and Emily to her world. She wanted them to see the mansion, the one that had felt like a prison since her parents' deaths. Nervously, Daniel agreed. When Emily's laughter echoed through the marble halls, when her small feet pattered across polished floors, the house no longer felt like a mausoleum. Elena realized she had been waiting for that sound, waiting for life to return. Daniel watched her closely, saw the way her eyes softened when Emily hugged her legs, and he understood. This wasn't just about gratitude or companionship. This was love. One evening, standing on the balcony as the city lights shimmered below, Elena finally spoke what had been growing between them. "You gave me shelter from the storm," she said, voice low but certain. "Not just that night, Daniel. Every day since. You and Emily, you're what I didn't know I was missing." Daniel met her gaze, his fears loud in his chest, but her honesty silenced them. He reached for her hand, rough fingers curling around hers, and for the first time since his wife's death, he allowed himself to imagine a future not defined by loss but by love. It wasn't a fairy tale. There would be challenges, judgment, and the struggle of blending two worlds that seemed built to clash. But as Elena leaned into him, as Emily called out from inside, laughter in her voice, Daniel realized something: the storm had only led her to his door because fate knew he needed her too. And so, under the fading autumn sky, the single dad who thought love had passed him by, and the CEO who had lived her life behind walls of glass and steel, chose to begin again, not as strangers bound by a storm, but as a family built by choice, by courage, and by love that asked for nothing more than the promise to stay. Sometimes the shelter we offer others becomes the very shelter we've been searching for all along.